Beep, 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 beep. Welcome to the Court of the Digester. I'm still full of cold. Welcome to the Court of the Digester. Ooh. What is under the weather? Right. If you can buy me a coffee, please, that'd be great. I've just, everything's, I'm, deboosted on YouTube, and it just makes you wonder what's the point, But I keep hammering through, hoping it'll all go back to normal. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Who knows? But anyway, I get to see my warrior teachers in this next week, so I'm very excited. It's my teaching week, and my favourite week of the month, when I get to see the good peeps who keep me sane, okay? That's a very hard task. You wouldn't want to take that on, keeping me sane. But nevertheless, let's move forward with something here from November 2023 from the marvellous floral Helen, Joyce. And here we have an article called Playing Nice Hasn't Worked, and it is in The Critic. So again, links for you in the doobers. Please do subscribe. Press the notification button, do all the usual stuff that you do. Buy me a coffee, warrior teacher, blah, blah, blah. Right, okay. And what it starts off, it's got a picture of, it begins Grace Lavatory. Do you know her? Him? Grace Lavatory. Vile, poor adult person, right? Even when I keep quiet, says Helen, about being cancelled, the censors didn't invite me back. This is really interesting. It's originally appeared in The Critic, as I said. Oh dear, sneeze. No, right. I really am under the weather. If you're a writer, artist, or academic who has strayed beyond the narrow bounds of approved discourse, two consequences will be intimately familiar. You remember I've spoken about Rosie Kay's new project and Denise Fay's new project. So again, a flavour of the arts coming through, isn't there, at the moment? Flavour of the arts. So two things will happen, two consequences. The first is that it becomes harder to get a hearing about anything. The second is that if you do manage to say anything publicly, especially if you talk about the silencing, it will be taken as proof that you have not been silenced. This is the logic of witch ducking. You may remember witch duck is a great scene in The Witchfinder General, where they duck them and they drown and therefore they were innocent. Matthew Hopkins, what a bastard. Right, okay. So this is the logic of witch ducking. If a woman drowns, she isn't a witch. If she floats, she is, and must be dispatched some other way. Either way, she ends up dead. The only counter to this specific example, is specific examples, but censorship is usually covert when you're passed over to speak at a conference, exhibit in a gallery, or apply for a visiting fellowship. You rarely find out. Every now and then, however, the censors tip their hands. And so everyone who says I can't have been cancelled because they can still hear me, here's the evidence. The first time I know it, that I was being censored, said Helen, was even before my book criticising trans ideology came out in mid-2021, and I urge you, if you've not read Trans, to go and get yourself a copy. I had been asked to talk about it on the podcast of Intelligence Squared, a media company that, according to its website, aims to promote a global conversation. We had booked a date and time. Now, Intelligence Squared has had some tremendous people speak. Stephen Fry has been on there, Christopher Hitchens. There's a great debate about is the Catholic Church a force for good. So you may know them from that, where they debated against Anne Widdecombe, and Roundly Trounster, or Trounster because she's roundly, one or the other. But as the date approached, Helen discovered that Intelligence Squared had dropped her. When she asked why, the response was surprisingly frank. Fear of a social media pylon, sponsors getting cold feet, and younger staff causing grief. It's always the kids, isn't it? Throwing their toys out the pram. The CEO of Intelligence Squared is a former war correspondent who has written a book about his experiences in Kosovo. But at the prospect of platforming a woman whose main message is that humans come in two sexes, his courage apparently ran out. It's quite extraordinary. Power of the mob. Next came the Irish Times, my home country's paper of record. Soon after my book came out, a well-known correspondent rang me, said he had stayed up all night to finish it and wanted to write about it. He interviewed me, fouled the piece, checked the quotes, and then silence. When I nudged by email, he said the piece had been spiked as it was going to press. Sometime around then, it was the BBC's turn. I don't know the exact date because I only found out months later when I met a presenter from a flagship news programme. Such a shame you couldn't come on the show, he said, to which I replied, I've never been asked. I could see Helen saying that. I've never been asked. I have never been asked. It turned out that he had told a researcher to invite me, but the researcher hadn't, instead simply lying that I wasn't available. Ideologues, right? Do X, and off they go and do Y. Traitors, ideologues, traitors in the midst, eh? Helen is still, she says here, never been on the BBC to discuss trans issues. That's quite insane, isn't it? To imagine that somebody who wrote a best-selling book and who is steeped and understands this in a much deeper way than the vast majority of people has still never been on our national television channel. What are you doing, BBC? Sort yourselves out, twats. Right. Next came ABC, the Australian straight broadcaster. So it's not just here, it's happening, global. Next came ABC, the Australian state broadcaster, which interviewed me for a radio show about religion and ethics. This time, when I nudged, I was told there had been technical glitches with the recording. Oh, the gremlins. The gremlins are out in your recordings. But they would love to revisit this one in the future. They've never been back in touch. It's just... You just think to yourself, you can't... It's that quiet not happening. I mean, all those instances there, Helen had to go, what's happening? Helen had to say, what's going on? Just nothing, just silence. Quietly pretend that you don't exist. Quietly pretend that what you have to say isn't important enough to be aired on national broadcasting. Quite surreal, quite surreal. Then Helen recorded an hour-long episode of Common Ground, a short-lived show on Sky News hosted by Trevor Phillips. Its premise was to seek points of agreement between people with differing positions on current issues. The other guest on the episode I was on was Joanna Harper, a trans-identified man who argues that trans-identified men who lower their testosterone levels should be allowed to compete in women's sporting competitions. So a LARPing, narcissistic, self-absorbed idiot then. All of that was agreed to, and yet as soon as I said male, Harper objected, saying he'd been promised no one would use that word. See, the kids, babies, children. He was overruled and the recording went ahead, but it never aired, and I don't know why. Perhaps because I insisted on stating that trans women are male, or because I stated the fact in front of a man so invested in denying it and made for pretty awkward viewing. That's a really interesting point about the awkward viewing, Helen. Because amongst us, we're like waiting for it. Amongst the folk that understand reality, amongst the vast majority of the population. Oh, that reminds me, I was on the train. I must tell you about that in a minute. Right, vast majority of the population, right? They're waiting for it. It's a bloke. Say it. Go on, say it. Well, this bloke and the bloke, Joyce, slapping the presenter and we're there. Go on, say it. Have him. Why they think we're not thinking that, I don't know. I was on the train, right? Bumped into two really interesting guys, right, around a company. They were really fascinating guys. They were also very easy on the eye, it must be said. But they were these really lovely two guys, asking questions about schools, asking questions about what's going on. One of them was a young father, had children, and he was worried about what was going to happen. And I had to say to him, and I did say to him, look after your wife and family, do what you got to do to build your life, and we've got your back for the moment, but you'll know when the time comes for you to say something, if you get the chance to go to the school and talk. But it was really interesting to talk to people outside of our normal bubble on the train back from London the other day. So that was rather fascinating. Sorry, that was an interlude. I just couldn't help but put it in there. And then when Helen asked Sky, what's going on? What's happened, right? They told me that after reviewing the show, we felt they weren't really happy with it. Basically, our production standards were not good enough. This is absolutely no reflection on you. You were engaging and interesting, and we'd love to invite you back on Sky News. Reader, says Helen, they haven't. Go and have a read. But I'll leave you with the rest of it, because Helen's taken the time to write it. You should read it. There's plenty there. But my God, it shows you the pathway of how somebody can be counselled. How suddenly you go from being somebody, oh yeah, we'll get you on, and then somebody objects. It'll be that some, self-masturbating 19-year-old blue-haired tosser called Tarquin, won't it? Who spends most of his time out in the photocopying cupboard wiping his knob with a tissue. You'd have gone, and then Joyce, no, we can't have that. Oh, transphobe. And all the higher ups will go, no, we can't have that. Can't upset the youth. Onwards, folks. Let them cut that. Let them get that little bit. All right. So, other than that, have a grand day. Go and read Helen's article. It's brilliant. Buy me a coffee. Become a warrior teacher. Just right. See you later. Ta-ra.